So here's how it all unfolded. Bulldozers showed up, tore apart my grandfather's old fence, and suddenly I was painted as the villain. They came in, wiped out a piece of my family's history, and then, believe it or not, they turned around and sued me for trying to stop them. Yeah, you heard that right. At first, I honestly thought it was some kind of joke, like something you'd hear on Anna Drama Nest. But no, this was real life. And now I feel like I've been dropped into the middle of some terrible reality show. To make it worse, I can't shake the feeling that they're watching me. Tell me in the comments what you do, because I'm this close to packing up and moving to a deserted island. The roar of diesel engines at 6:30 in the morning isn't something you expect on a ranch that's been in your family since before the Civil War. I jumped out of bed in just my boxers and a worn-out t-shirt, rushing to the window. What I saw made my stomach sink. A bulldozer was ripping through the oak fence that had stood as a marker of our land for generations. The operator sat in his climate-controlled cab like it was just another day on the job, completely unaware or maybe not caring that he was erasing over a century of history with each push of that blade. My grandfather had built the fence by hand, using oak posts and pure Texas pride, each section carefully laid to follow the natural rise and fall of our pasture. Since 1875, every Hayes man had maintained those boundaries, replacing worn boards and storm-damaged sections with the kind of care no modern contractor bothers with anymore. Watching that machine tear through the fence left me with a crushing sense of helplessness. This wasn't just lumber being splintered, it was my family's story being reduced to rubble. Every broken board felt like another chapter of our heritage being fed into the jaws of greed. I didn't even bother putting on shoes. Fury surged through me as I bolted outside, gravel cutting into my bare feet with every step. But as I got closer, confusion started creeping in. Why were they doing this? What gave them the right? I shouted at the top of my lungs. Stop! Get off my land! The words ripped out of me with a rage I didn't even know I had. The bulldozer operator glanced at me through the glass like I was some kind of escaped mental patient, then pointed casually toward a woman standing next to a spotless white pickup. That was the first time I ever laid eyes on Jillian Harper. She looked to be in her mid-40s, dressed in a sleek black business suit that probably cost more than most people around here make in a month. She clutched a clipboard like it was holy scripture, her expression colder than the January dawn on the Texas plains. When I stormed over, still panting from the sprint across the yard, she didn't even flinch. No shame, no apology, and just this calculating smile, like a shark spotting wounded prey. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut steel, "this is a legally approved easement. That means we have the right to build this road through your land, whether you like it or not. You should actually be thanking me. I'm about to raise your property value." I had to stop and stare. Did she really think I was going to thank her for tearing down my grandfather's fence? The arrogance was staggering. "Regardless of how you feel," she continued, waving a stack of official-looking papers in my face like I was a child throwing a tantrum, "we have every legal right to proceed. The documents are in perfect order, filed with the county and approved by the proper authorities. You have absolutely no legal grounds to stop us." The way she spoke to me, as if I was some ignorant bumpkin who couldn't understand property law, made my blood boil. Looking back, I should have known then she was going to be nothing but trouble. Without waiting for her to finish, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. While waiting for the police, I scrambled to gather old wood and barbed wire from around the ranch, trying to rebuild a makeshift fence right across their fresh asphalt. I hammered up signs that read "private property" and "no trespassing" with the desperate determination of someone watching their family's legacy being destroyed. My hands shook with rage, but I refused to let them trample over everything without resistance. When the police finally arrived, I thought justice was about to be served. But instead of arresting Jillian and her crew, they told me I had to prove that I actually owned the land they were tearing apart. I couldn't believe it. This ranch had been in my family since before Texas even became a state, and now I was being treated like some squatter. Jillian smugly handed over her easement documents, and the officers examined them like they were sacred texts. "Looks legit to me, sir," one of them said as he handed the papers back to her as casually as if he were returning a borrowed book. I wanted to tell him about the history of this land, about how my ancestor carved this ranch out of nothing but prairie and determination, but his expression made it clear his mind was already made up. This land had been in my family for 5 generations, passed down from father to son like a sacred trust, and now some woman in a suit was claiming she had the right to run a road straight through the heart of it. That evening, as I stood in the ruins of what used to be our fence line, still trying to process the fact that bulldozers had torn through my heritage, a delivery truck pulled up the drive. The driver handed me an envelope that made my hands tremble even before I opened it. Inside was a lawsuit from the HOA, demanding $25,000 in damages. They were accusing me of unlawfully blocking a public easement. Can you believe that? They were actually dragging me into court for trying to protect my own land from being destroyed. At that point, I shouldn't have been shocked anymore, but the sheer ridiculousness of it still left me stunned. Before I could even process what was happening, Jillian turned toward me with that same icy smile. "You have no idea what's coming next," she said, her words hitting harder than the papers she had just handed me. I stared down at the stack of legal documents, feeling like they weighed 100 pounds. They were nothing more than sheets of paper filled with complicated legal language, but what they represented was terrifying. The HOA wasn't just asking for damages, they wanted every cent plus court costs, plus a permanent order forcing me to tear down any barrier I ever put up again. On top of that, they demanded $500 a day in fines for what they called obstruction of essential community infrastructure. I read the papers 3 times, but it still didn't feel real until the weight of it finally settled in. The anger boiled up inside me, but beneath it, fear crept in too. The numbers were staggering. What they wanted in damages was more than I made on the ranch in an entire good year. Add court fees and attorney costs, and it could easily double or triple. If they won, it wouldn't just hurt her, it would ruin me. I'd be forced to sell the very land I was fighting so desperately to protect. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Defending my family's legacy could end up costing me the legacy itself. Finding a lawyer willing to fight in HOA turned out to be a battle of its own. Most of the attorneys I called specialized in divorce or personal injury cases. The few who did handle property disputes backed off as soon as I mentioned the words homeowners association. That's when a friend gave me the name William Davies, a seasoned property lawyer in his 50s who had been through his own war within HOA. Apparently, they once tried to force him to tear down his backyard workshop, claiming it violated some obscure architectural guideline no one had ever even heard of. William's office looked exactly like you'd expect from a small-town lawyer who had been battling giants for decades. Stacks of law books crowded every corner, a coffee pot that looked like it hadn't been washed since the 90s, and a desk overflowing with case files that seemed to multiply when you weren't looking. When we met, I could see the fire in his eyes right away. He wasn't just another attorney, he understood the weight of what was at stake. "This isn't only about your land," he said, leaning back in his chair like he'd already seen this story play out. "This is about stopping them before they steamroll every family ranch between here and Dallas." What struck me most was how quickly he became invested in my fight. "Look," he said, pulling out a thick folder marked HOA abuse cases. "I've been up against these people before. They all run the same playbook: intimidation, phony legal documents, and high-priced lawyers bankrolled by developers. They bet on regular folks being too scared or too broke to push back. But your fight is my fight now, because if we don't stop them here, they'll keep chipping away until there's nothing left of old Texas." He barely glanced at Jillian's easement paperwork before his eyes narrowed. The way he studied it reminded me of a detective spotting a clue no one else noticed. Then he froze, staring at the notary seal. "This says it was recorded in 1985, William muttered, frowning. "But this seal a broken bar, it looks too clean, too new. And why on earth would your grandfather give away property rights right before he passed? That doesn't add up legally or practically." That was the first crack in their so-called airtight case. Buried on page 3, hidden in a wall of legal jargon Jillian had conveniently skipped over during her speech, was a small but powerful clause. A grantor maintains right to revoke easement with 30 days written notice. William read it aloud, his voice rising with each word. "If this thing is real, Your grandfather could have cancelled the entire easement by simply filing a letter with the county clerk. The question I said, did he ever do it? Meanwhile, Jillian didn't let up. Every morning like clockwork, another violation notice appeared at my door. According to her twisted interpretation of property law, every day I kept a barrier on my land meant another $500 fine. Each notice felt like one more nail they were trying to hammer into my coffin. It felt like the walls were closing in. The pressure was unbearable, but I refused to back down. After 3 straight days of harassment, I finally had no choice but to take down my makeshift fence and signs. Still, I wasn't about to let them trample me unnoticed. I kept security cameras rolling, documenting every second of what was happening on what used to be my private land. Watching strangers drive through my ranch as if it were some public highway made me sick to my core. But the psychological warfare was just as brutal as the financial pressure. They wanted to break me before I even set foot in a courtroom. Every morning brought fresh humiliation. Neighbors I'd known my whole life drove past the wreckage of my fence, some staring, others quickly looking away, as if ashamed or afraid. The message was crystal clear. This is what happens when you stand up against the system. This is what happens when you dare challenge forces bigger than yourself. At first, a few people offered quiet support, but one by one, they faded away, their fear written all over their faces. And then they had the nerve to sue you? William muttered, shaking his head, his disbelief sharpened by years of watching powerful groups abuse the law. First, they roll bulldozers onto your property and tear down a fence that's been standing since before the telephone was invented. Then they flip the story and make you the criminal just for defending your land. I've seen outrageous cases before, but this only a broken bar. This one takes the cake. His outrage gave me a strange kind of relief. At least someone else could see how insane this was. And William promised me one thing: we were going to fight this battle as far as it needed to go, even if that meant the Supreme Court. The more we dug into the details, the stranger it all became. William pulled county death records for my grandfather and cross-referenced them with the dates on Jillian's so-called easement document. What we uncovered should have been impossible, but it was right there in cold, undeniable black and white government records. My grandfather had passed away in December 1982, yet, according to the notary seal, the easement had been signed in March of 1985. This might be the opening we need, William said slowly, setting down the death certificate as though it were dynamite. Your grandfather couldn't have signed this. He'd already been dead for more than 2 years when this was supposedly notarized. I opened my mouth to respond, but William cut himself off, still staring at the document in disbelief. There's something seriously wrong with this paperwork, he whispered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather and everything he taught me about protecting this land. I remembered him sitting on the porch after dinner, telling stories about rustlers and land thieves who tried every trick to cheat honest ranchers. Never trust anyone who wants your land, Cameron, he'd say, his weathered hands gripping a coffee mug like it held the secrets of the universe. They'll use tricks you've heard of and tricks no one's even thought of yet. Did he somehow know this would happen? Had he tried to warn me all those years ago, when I was too young or stubborn to understand? While I wrestled with sleepless nights and old family ghosts, William got to work. He hired a certified handwriting expert, Dr. Sarah Kim, a forensic specialist who'd testified in federal fraud cases. When she finished analyzing my grandfather's so-called signature, her findings were more damning than we ever expected. This signature was traced from a real document, she explained, spreading out comparison photos across William's conference table like evidence in a murder trial. The pressure points, the ink flow, they all point to forgery. Whoever did this was no amateur. This was the work of someone highly skilled. Meanwhile, William expanded the investigation beyond just my property. He combed through county records for other families who might have been targeted in the same way. What we discovered chilled me to the bone. The HOA had pulled this exact same stunt before. In the past 5 years, they had used nearly identical fraudulent easements to seize land from at least 4 other families. The pattern was always the same: landowners supposedly signing away property rights years after they were already dead. Legal documents conveniently appearing too late for grieving families to fight back, and intimidation tactics keeping them silent. That's when William suggested we track down one of these past victims. I agreed, not knowing just how heartbreaking it would be. Elena Rodriguez was 72 years old, living in a modest home her family had held on to for generations. Just like mine, she welcomed us into her kitchen, poured coffee into chipped ceramic mugs, and began to tell her story. Her voice shook with equal parts anger and shame. "They told me in English I don't understand good," she said quietly. "I signed paper thinking it'd help community, a broken bar thinking maybe they build something nice for the children. My garden is gone forever," Elena whispered, her voice trembling with grief. "And when I asked for it back, they only laughed at me." Her vegetable garden had been everything to her: a quarter-acre of rich soil where she grew tomatoes, peppers, and corn to feed her grandchildren, and often half the neighborhood too. It wasn't just food, it was her legacy. The HOA had bulldozed it all to lay down a road, claiming it was essential for emergency vehicle access to the luxury subdivision they were planning. But the cruelty didn't stop there. When Elena tried to replant a small garden in another corner of her property, they cited her for unauthorized landscaping and threatened her with daily fines until she tore it out. At that point, it was obvious that this wasn't about rules. They just wanted her gone. When we pieced together county records, a horrifying pattern became clear. The HOA had been targeting the same kind of people over and over: elderly families with valuable land, especially properties bordering shiny new developments that were popping up across the county like poisonous mushrooms. They weren't going after the wealthy or the well-connected. They focused on those who had the least power to fight back: families without deep pockets for attorneys, people without the energy for years of legal battles. One by one, the most vulnerable members of our community were being pushed aside, each loss making the next family easier to crush. But Jillian wasn't satisfied with stealing land and bulldozing property. She worked hard to poison the well, organizing so-called community meetings where she painted me as the villain, claiming I was a selfish rancher standing in the way of progress. According to her, I was some backwards fool who cared more about rotting fence posts than public safety or neighborhood improvements. The smear campaign worked. Some of my own neighbors, people who'd shared Sunday dinners and brandy with my family for decades, started avoiding me altogether. They didn't want to risk being associated with the problem family and becoming the HOA's next target. The pressure was relentless. Every morning I woke up bracing myself for Jillian's next attack. Another violation notice, another forged document, another humiliation waiting in my mailbox. And each new paper I held in my hands felt like a betrayal of everything I stood for. At night, I'd stand where my property line used to be, watching strangers drive across land that 5 generations of my family had poured their sweat into. And I'd wonder, was I just being paranoid? Or was this truly some elaborate scheme to erase my family's legacy forever? That's when I decided to go digging through my grandfather's old papers, desperate to find something that could strengthen our fight. The attic was cramped and heavy with dust, untouched since my grandmother passed away 15 years earlier. For hours I sifted through boxes of old tax returns, property surveys, faded photographs, anything that might hold a clue. Most of it was nothing unusual, but then, tucked inside a shoebox beneath my grandmother's recipe cards, I found something that changed everything. It was my grandfather's original will from 1982, at the year he died. I had never seen it before, never even knew it existed. But the moment I unfolded the pages and saw his handwriting, my heart began to race. There, in a clause written in his unmistakable scrawl, were words that shook me to my core. "This land shall never be subject to easements without the unanimous consent of all living heirs, and such consent must be renewed every 10 years. My grandfather had seen this fight coming decades ago. He had written his will specifically to prevent exactly this kind of attack. And here's the part that nearly made me drop the paper: his will had never been fully processed through probate court, which meant it was still valid, still enforceable. That meant Jillian's entire quasi, her forged easements, her bulldozed roads, her liasa was built on something legally impossible from the very beginning. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. This wasn't just a life lineage, it was a weapon strong enough to destroy their case outright. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Looking back, I should have known better. Nothing about this nightmare was ever going to be that simple. But in that moment, Holding my grandfather's will in my trembling hands, I let myself believe we'd finally won. One thought haunted me, though: what else was still hidden in the shadows? What other surprises were waiting to gut me when I least expected it? Just as I picked up the phone to call William, a new document slipped under the door. Its contents left me more shaken than anything I had seen before. William's discovery about the unprocessed will meant we could finally move from defense to offense. But that also meant the stakes had just been raised and the target on my back had never been bigger. The legal breakthrough gave us hope, but it also came with risks neither of us fully understood. Filing a motion to dismiss the HOA's lawsuit and countersuing them for fraud wasn't just a legal move, it was a declaration of war against people who had already proven they were willing to lie, forge documents, and intimidate anyone who stood in their way. William warned me that stepping into this territory would paint bigger targets on our backs. The more dangerous we become to them, he said, the more dangerous they'll become to us. He wasn't wrong. Some days I wondered if it was worth it, the stress, the fear, the constant weight on my chest. But then I'd think of my grandfather, of how he fought tooth and nail for this land, and I knew giving up wasn't an option. What we needed now was undeniable proof tying Jillian and the HOA directly to loaner development. The consulting contracts were on record, but those weren't enough. William reached out to a whistleblower inside the county FSA, an employee who had been quietly watching the corruption unfold but was too terrified to step forward without protection. The informant agreed to meet us after midnight, at a remote location far outside of town. That alone told me how dangerous this really was. Suddenly, this wasn't just a land dispute, it felt like we were going up against organized criminals who had woven themselves into local government. We met at an abandoned gas station 15 miles away, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a crime thriller. The county worker pulled up in an old pickup truck with no plates, a baseball cap pulled low over their face. "They'll fire me if they find out I gave you this," the whistleblower whispered, sliding a manila envelope into William's hands. "These people have connections everywhere: courthouse, police department, even the local paper. You're fighting something far bigger than you realize." Inside the envelope were photocopied transcripts from closed-door county commissioner meetings. The documents exposed Jake Morrison fast-tracking easement approvals for loaner development without the required legal reviews. For 3 years, he had rubber-stamped every single application connected to loaner or its subsidiaries. What made the evidence explosive was the timeline. Most of the approvals were signed within 24 hours of submission, when state law required weeks, even months, for proper environmental and legal checks. It was a paper trail of corruption, and now it was in our hands. Meanwhile, a drama nest finally began drawing media attention. Reporters picked up on our claims of forged documents and county-level corruption, but Jillian wasn't about to let the narrative slip away. She launched a full-scale PR campaign, painting herself and the HOA as protectors of the community. She appeared on local television looking polished and professional, warning viewers that I was blocking access for emergency vehicles. "What happens," she asked the cameras, "if someone dies because an ambulance can't get through?" It was a brilliant Leah, twisting our legitimate legal fight into a supposed public safety issue. And though it was dishonest, I couldn't deny it was effective. Still, William and I pushed back. He set up interviews with investigative reporters willing to look deeper than the HOA's talking points. We showed them the fraudulent easement papers, along with county death records proving my grandfather couldn't possibly have signed them. Our approach was built on facts, and that started to shift public opinion. But the more ground we gained, the more reckless Jillian became. Her desperation reached a new level when she came to my ranch one evening, alone. Driving her white pickup, she carried a briefcase that looked heavy with cash. "Cameron," she said, smiling as if we were old friends, "I'll give you $100,000 in cash, right now, plus a written agreement limiting road usage to genuine emergencies. Be practical if this can all end tonight." When I refused, the mask dropped. Her tone shifted from sweet to venomous in an instant. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she hissed, her voice low enough to make the hair on my neck stand up. "We have resources you can't imagine. We've crushed bigger obstacles than one stubborn rancher. Walk away now while you still can." This wasn't just about money or legal intimidation anymore. The threats were raw, personal, and deadly serious. This woman wasn't just threatening to win in court, she was threatening to destroy me personally. And the terrifying part was, I believed she had both the power and the will to follow through. At that point, the fight had gone far beyond lawsuits. I wasn't only defending land anymore, I was fighting for my life. I often walked the fence line my grandfather had built with his own hands. Out there, I could hear his voice as if he were beside me again, telling me the stories of the old days when honest men had to fight tooth and nail to keep what was theirs. He used to say, "This land chooses its people. It will stand for those who belong here, but only if they stand for it first." That connection was everything. 150 years of blood, sweat, and history holding me up when my spirit felt like breaking. But then, the HOA escalated. They hired Sterling Associates, a powerhouse law firm out of Dallas infamous for steamrolling small landowners into submission. Within days, the firm filed an emergency motion claiming I was threatening vital public safety. They stuffed it with fabricated emergency reports and bogus traffic studies, all designed to twist my defense of family land into a community hazard. This wasn't just a civil case anymore, it was organized crime, cloaked in legal paperwork. But this time, I wasn't standing alone. Elena Rodriguez and the other families who had also been bullied stepped forward. Together, we rallied at the courthouse, bringing press coverage and raising more than $45,000 in donations in only 10 days. Standing there with them, I realized this wasn't just about me or even our land. It was about proving that powerful people don't get to rob families just because they have deeper pockets and political ties. What I didn't know was how vicious the counterattack would be. That same week, I spotted a shadowy figure lingering at the edge of my property. The fight had shifted again. Legal threats weren't enough anymore. They wanted to scare me into submission. And they weren't just targeting me. Every family, neighbor, and friend who had stood beside us was suddenly in danger. As I approached the figure, a voice slipped out from the dark, "You're not going to win this fight, Cameron." It was a chilling reminder that the midnight meeting at that abandoned gas station hadn't just armed us with evidence, it had also made us the biggest threats to their scheme. Loner Development, the company behind the luxury subdivision, had already purchased 12 parcels around my ranch over the last 3 years. But when William examined the sales records, something caught his eye immediately. Every property had been bought for roughly 20% below market value. In a booming real estate market, that doesn't just happen. It meant pressure, serious, coordinated pressure had been applied to force those sales. And my ranch, my land, was the last missing piece of their puzzle. Without access to the county roads, all 12 parcels were nearly worthless, good for cattle or crops. Nothing more. But with a road carved through my ranch, the land value skyrocketed. They could build 200 luxury homes and walk away with around $50 million in profit. Suddenly, Jillian's ruthless determination made perfect financial sense. But understanding it didn't make living through it any easier. Legal costs drained my savings faster than I could imagine, and William didn't sugarcoat the risk. "If we lose," he warned, "it won't just be the $25,000 they're suing for. Sterling Associates will demand you pay their legal fees, too. And if that happens, you'll lose the ranch just trying to cover the costs." It was my darkest hour. For the first time, I felt the crushing weight of 5 generations threatening to disappear, not because we were wrong, but because we couldn't afford to be right. And then, things turned darker still. One Tuesday night in late September, someone broke into William's office. Nothing was stolen. Instead, every file, every document, every piece of evidence was scattered across the floor like shredded confetti. It was a message, a warning. They weren't backing down, and they wanted us to know exactly how far they were willing to go. The break-in at William's office had shaken everyone, but things only got worse. Whoever did it wasn't some amateur. The lock on his front door had been picked clean, and the security camera had been spray-painted black sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight. William called it professional intimidation, but I knew what it really was: a warning. We were digging into something they didn't want uncovered. And then we found out the truth behind Jillian's land grab. The rot went far deeper than the hoe. It reached straight into county government. County Commissioner Jake Morrison had approved every shady easement in the last 5 years, so without holding the public hearings required by state law. And it wasn't just laziness. His wife was listed as a consultant for loan development, pulling in six-figure salaries for work no one could define or explain. When William pushed for more details, he was stonewalled. Proprietary business information, they said. In other words, off limits to the public. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more personal, Jillian proved me wrong. She drove up to my ranch one afternoon, stepping out with a private security guard who looked like he'd been hired straight out of a movie about hired muscle. She didn't even bother pretending anymore. "Mr. Hayes," she said coldly, standing in my driveway as if she owned it. "If you continue harassing HOA board members and spreading lies about our legitimate business practices, I'll have no choice but to press trespassing charges against you. Consider this your final warning." The guard said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence paired with the way his hand rested near whatever he had under his jacket was louder than words. Stories like this, I used to only hear about on Anna Drama Nest. I never imagined I'd end up starring in one. Yet here I was, living through my own nightmare, surrounded by corruption and intimidation. The stress was unbearable. My sleep was shot, my appetite gone, and even the simplest chores on the ranch felt overwhelming. William finally suggested the boldest move via countersuing. If it worked, we could flip the entire situation against them. Meanwhile, Jillian escalated her public smear campaign with surgical precision. She organized a petition and collected 40 signatures from neighbors demanding I stop blocking essential community improvements. The local newspaper even ran an editorial branding me as a stubborn old rancher standing in the way of progress, written by someone who hadn't once asked for my side of the story. In the public's eyes, I was becoming the villain, not the victim, and I could feel the tide turning against me. Neighbors who had shared decades of friendship now avoided eye contact at the grocery store or post office. Some probably believed I was selfish. Others were simply scared, afraid they'd become targets if they sided with me. The isolation cut deeper than the legal bills. At night, when cars slowed outside my ranch or figures appeared at the edge of my property, I realized this fight had moved beyond paperwork. It was about survival. As my legal expenses climbed to the price of a brand new pickup truck, I found myself against everything I'd promised, actually considering Jillian's settlement offer. Maybe I should take the money, move on, and buy land somewhere untouched by hoes and crooked commissioners. Maybe I wasn't brave anymore. Maybe I was just being stubborn, clinging to a dream already lost. But every time that thought sank in, I heard my grandfather's voice, his words, his lessons about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. And then, I remembered the document we'd found in the attic, the will. It might be the key to turning this fight in our favor. At least, that's what I kept telling myself to keep going. There were nights when doubt crept in, whispering that maybe this so-called victory was nothing more than an illusion, just another step before they crushed me with their endless wealth and connections. That's when it hit me. Winning in court wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The real fight for justice was just starting, and it was about to erupt in ways I never could have imagined. One evening, as I sat alone on my porch, a shadow crossed the steps. Someone was watching. Then came the emergency hearing of the legal showdown of my life. Sterling's team arrived armed to the teeth, their polished lawyers spinning a web of lies with the kind of slick professionalism that only deep pockets can buy. They rolled out color-coded charts showing fake emergency response times, bogus traffic studies insisting the ranch road was critical for public safety, and even brought in hired actors pretending to be concerned citizens worried about ambulances. Watching them perform their deception with such confidence, I finally understood why so many families before me had given up. Against that level of money and power, most people never stood a chance. Leading the charge was Marcus Sterling himself, a silver-haired powerhouse in an immaculate suit. The room shifted the moment he walked in. His opening statement was a masterclass in manipulation, painting me as a dangerous extremist whose stubbornness put innocent lives at risk. The way he twisted basic property rights into something ugly and antisocial was breathtaking and deeply sinister. Judge Patricia Williams seemed persuaded at first. Her words hit me like a slap. "Mr. Hayes," she said firmly, peering down at me, "if your actions prevent emergency services from saving lives, This court must prioritize public safety over individual property rights. The greater good sometimes requires personal sacrifice. Her tone was sharp, condescending, like I was some reckless child who didn't understand the needs of the community. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay composed and trust William's plan. Still, for the first time in this fight, real doubt gnawed at me. What if everything we'd done was for nothing? What if we were already beaten? And then William struck back. Piece by piece, he dismantled their case, replacing their fiction with undeniable facts. He subpoenaed actual records from the county fire department and ambulance service, proving 2 other access routes to the subdivision already existed and were faster than the one through my ranch. Every single claim about essential access was a lie. The courtroom shifted. "You could feel it, Your Honor," William said, spreading official county maps across the evidence table. The plaintiff's own studies conveniently omit 2 major access roads, both providing faster emergency response than the disputed easement. Their safety argument is nothing more than selective information meant to mislead this court. Judge Williams' face hardened. Her initial sympathy toward the HOA evaporated as she studied the records contradicting everything they'd presented. Watching William dismantle their lies was like watching a grandmaster at chess, methodical, precise, devastating. One by one, their pieces fell until they were left exposed. Their game unraveled. Then came the testimony that sealed it. Fire Chief Robert Martinez himself took the stand. Calm, professional, and irrefutable, he testified that his department had never once requested access through my ranch and had never experienced delays reaching the subdivision. Their entire foundation had crumbled. The ambulance service director testified with precision, confirming that their average response time to the subdivision was just 6 minutes using existing roads. If they were forced through my ranch's narrow gates and cattle guards, it would take 9 minutes longer, not shorter. But the turning point came when William called Jillian to the stand. She walked up brimming with confidence, convinced her rehearsed lies would protect her. "I serve this hope purely out of community duty," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "I gain nothing personally. My only goal is to ensure public safety and improve our neighborhood." The moment I saw the evidence William was about to unveil, I knew it would change everything. She had nowhere to hide. With steady hands, William presented the smoking gun. Bank records. They showed Jillian had received $280,000 in consulting fees from Loner Development over the past 3 years, along with ownership stakes in the very company developing stolen land. She wasn't just approving shady easements, she was stealing property to inflate the value of her own investments. Her mask cracked instantly. Gone was the smug confidence. In its place, panic. "Those consulting fees were legitimate," she stammered, voice trembling. "I had no role in easement approvals. Other board members handled that." The lie hung heavy in the air. And then Elena stepped forward with a witness who had seen Jillian tamper with a notary seal. That testimony was the final nail. The financial evidence triggered a sweeping investigation. It revealed Jillian had been orchestrating the same scheme across 3 counties, stealing more than $2 million in property through fraudulent easements and forged documents. Federal investigators stormed into the courthouse before the hearing even ended. Warrants in hand, they seized Jillian's financial records and moved to arrest her for conspiracy, fraud, and running what prosecutors described as an organized crime ring targeting elderly landowners across East Texas. Even then, Jillian tried to wriggle free, facing ruin. She attempted one last desperate move via blaming rogue board members and claiming she'd been manipulated. "I was a victim too," she insisted, suddenly portraying herself as innocent. "I'll testify against the real criminals if I'm granted immunity." Her desperation deepened when she accused County Commissioner Morrison of masterminding the scheme, claiming he had blackmailed her into cooperating. But prosecutors were already ahead of her. They had Morrison's financial records and the money trail led straight back to Jillian's own accounts. Every lie she told only tightened the noose, adding obstruction and perjury to her growing list of crimes. The courtroom buzzed with disbelief. I caught Jillian's eyes one last time. That arrogant smirk she once wore was gone. She knew the game was over. Still, my victory was bittersweet. We had won, but at a cost. The battle had drained everything from me. Judge Williams didn't just dismiss the HOA's lawsuit as she went further. The HOA was ordered to cover all my legal expenses, plus punitive damages designed to send a message to anyone else daring to try such scams again. The final ruling awarded me $78,000 in legal fees and an additional $50,000 in punitive damages. The court called their lawsuit frivolous litigation with malicious intent, aimed at enabling organized crime. Federal prosecutors acted quickly. Jillian's attempt to push blame collapsed when investigators uncovered her personal signature on most of the forged documents, along with her control of the bank accounts funneling illegal profits. Cornered, Jillian pled guilty to federal charges of fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and operating a criminal enterprise. Jillian was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, along with $600,000 in restitution payments to the families she had wronged over the last 5 years. County Commissioner Jake Morrison wasn't spared either. He received a 2-year federal sentence and a lifetime ban from holding public office anywhere in the United States. His wife lost all her consulting contracts and faced civil lawsuits from every family whose property had been stolen under Morrison's corrupt approval process. The Crooked HOA board was dismantled under federal court supervision, and every fraudulent easement was declared void and unenforceable. All the stolen land was returned to its rightful owners at no cost, including Elena Rodriguez, who immediately began replanting her cherished garden space. The sweetest justice came when the HOA was ordered to remove their illegal road and restore my ranch to its original condition. The cost of $140,008 came out of their own emergency fund. Watching contractors carefully replant the ancient oak trees exactly where my ancestors had once placed them felt like history itself was being set right. The restoration project took 3 months and required specialists skilled in traditional fence construction methods dating back to the 1870s, when this ranch was first established. Meanwhile, Loner Development collapsed into bankruptcy within 6 months, unable to recover from the legal and public backlash. Every property they had snatched through fraud was returned, and their luxury subdivision plan was permanently blocked by new county ordinances designed to prevent similar schemes in the future. Elena Rodriguez received $10,000 in compensation for her destroyed garden, plus coverage for her legal fees. She told me with tears in her eyes, "Now my grandchildren know what true justice looks like here and that good people can win when they stand together against bullies and criminals." Seeing neighborhood children play in her restored garden showed me this fight was about far more than property lines. With part of the settlement I'd received, I established a legal defense fund to help rural families battle HOA abuse and property theft. The fund provides free legal support for families who can't afford expensive attorneys when powerful people try to steal their land through fraud or corruption. At the fund's launch, I said, "No family should face this nightmare alone. We protect each other's property rights, just like our ancestors did when they first settled this county." 6 months later came one final moment of poetic justice. Jillian's foreclosed luxury home built on land she had stolen from another family went up for auction. Using the very money she was forced to pay me, I submitted the winning bid, and instead of keeping it, I donated the property to the county for veterans housing. Transforming her monument to grid into a home for working families felt like the perfect ending to this long, painful battle. This ranch has withstood more than anyone can imagine, surviving the Civil War, the Great Depression, devastating droughts, and now a conspiracy fueled by corruption. But some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. This land is more than dirt and fences, it's my family's legacy. It cannot be bought, stolen, or corrupted by people who think money makes the rules. As long as the Hayes bloodline runs, this ranch will remain in my family for another 150 years, just as my grandfather intended when he built the very first fence. If you've stayed with me through this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, and if you'd like to support the channel, hit the thanks button below. Stay strong and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching Anna Drama Nest. Share this video with someone who loves a good plot twist.